Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. This video continues our theme about observational drawing, or drawing what you see. Last week, we talked about drawing transparent objects, things you can see through. Today, we're going to talk about how to draw folds of fabric, and we're going to use all the same ideas that we've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 weeks. So last week, when we drew this bowl, this reflective, transparent bowl, we did a lot of measuring. We did a lot of looking. We did a lot of analyzing of dark and light values. That's all there is to it when we're drawing fabric. It's exactly the same thing. It's really exactly the same thing no matter what you're drawing. Fabric. Let's point out a couple of things first. This fabric is striped. Do you see dark black lines between the stripes? No. So when I draw stripes, should I make dark black lines between my stripes and then shade them every other stripe? No. No. What I should do for those stripes, I shouldn't see lines in the end. It should just be the value of a stripe being next to a different valued stripe. That's what's going to cause the value. That's what's going to cause the line, right? There isn't a dark black line, right? You don't want dark black lines outlining your stripes. You just want the value of one stripe to be next to another value, and that creates its own line. Second thing about those stripes is, do you even have to put them in? I'm not going to, because the most important part about this isn't the stripes on the fabric. The most important part about this for today is showing how the fabric folds and loops and bends over itself and where there's highlights and shadows. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. I'm not even going to look at the stripes. So what I'm looking for instead are areas like this right here. You see this line right here. Again, is there a dark black line there? Does it look like whoosh, where that is? With like, you know, shadow above it and light value under it. But does it have that black line down it? No. Again, the only way we see that line is that we have a light value here next to a darker value here. That's how we see those lines. And in a lot of places, we do see a nice clear distinction. Like right here, there's like a number 4 value next to a number 2 value. And that's a very clear distinction, and so it looks like a nice, clean, crisp line. But then other places, like just the opposite side of that shadow, there's not really a line between number 4, number 3, number 2. It's sort of a fade. And the differences between where we see a nice, clear line versus where we see it fade is going to be a difference between where we see it overlapping versus where we just see a curvature. Okay? So where it overlaps, we're going to see a nice crisp line between. It's not like a black line between, but it's a nice clean edge, is a better word, edge between the two different values. Okay? So I'm going to start with this down here as an example. And I'm not even really going to measure today. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and because the important thing is understanding the differences between where we see a clean edge and where we see a faded edge. So here, there's overlapping happening, so there's a clean edge. And for that, I'm going to, you know, it's kind of got a wave to it, so I'm going to kind of get that wave to it. And it's like a number 3 over here, fading into a number 2, fading into a number 1. But up against that edge that I just made, I'm just going to be shading it. And I don't want to see a clear black line, a dark black line at that edge. I want the form, the three-dimensionality of it, to create that edge. I don't want to use a solid line, an outline. Okay? And this value on this bottom section does fade. Like I said, it's like a number 3 here, and then it fades to a number 2. And then fades to like a number 1 over here. So I do want this value underneath this line, underneath that edge. I do want that value to shift as it moves across. So it's going to be darker here. Let me push that a little harder to make it a little darker. And then to get a nice fade, I'm just going to be lightening up as I press my way across. So like I'm pushing hard here, but as I move across, I'm just not applying as much pressure. And you see how it gently fades from darker to medium. And I didn't fade it all the way to light. If I want it to be just a little bit lighter, I could use my finger to kind of smudgy and pick up a little bit of that value. If I want it to be significantly lighter, I could use my eraser to pick up some of that value. There's lots of ways to handle that. Okay, the idea though is what's happening as we cross that edge. Okay, I don't want it to be a line. I want to think of it as an edge. Okay, and on the other side of that edge, it's black. It's just as dark black as it can get. Okay, so that doesn't mean I'm going to make a black line here. It means I'm going to shade an area completely black, right? And I am going to be pushing down with the pencil to do that. And notice that if you do this correctly, it's not that there's a line between the two things. It's that there's just different values on opposite sides of the edge. And here I'm just kind of eyeballing the shape of this shadow in here, this completely black area. But then I'm noticing that here it starts to fade up into a number 3 and a number 2 value. And so where it does that, again, I'm just eyeballing it, not really measuring things. But where it does that, I want, instead of having a clear edge like we had here, a clear edge between this form and that shadow, I want to fade it. And so to do that, I've got it super dark here, and I'm just gonna work the pressure just a little bit lighter, at a time, as it moves up into that area. Now there's it's this dark black patch, kind of takes this shape, but then it fades lighter as it moves up out of that shadow. So I've got it super dark here, and then I'm just changing the pressure, not quite pushing as hard, as I move my way up out of that shadow. And then there's like this almost triangular shape, but curvy, where it's like a number 1 value up here and then a 0 up above, right? So I'm just gonna kind of shade in. I'm not even drawing an outline for it. I'm letting the form be created by shading. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm not really measuring to make sure I get it exactly right. The idea is letting the form be created through shading instead of through outlines, okay? So really the only difference between today and anything else we've done over the past however many weeks we've been working on this is that I'm getting away from lines. I'm not drawing lines anymore. I'm just thinking in terms of value and using that value to create three-dimensional form. As I come up over this edge, it turns into like a number 1 or a number 0 value. And again, that's a fade from a 2 into a 1 and then into a 0. And then along this edge, it's like a 0. But then on the opposite side of that edge, there's a darker value. But it's like a 1-ish up at the top. It's like a 2 or 3 down here. And so I'm just letting those differences in value create the overlapping and the shadows and the highlights. I'm not drawing outlines of any of my shapes. Just letting the shading create those forms. Now, I personally like to listen to some music while I'm doing any kind of drawing that's going to take any time that I need to focus on. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of chill out here and kind of work on this a little bit longer. I'm going to put it in time lapse. It's going to look like it only took me half a second here, but it's, you know, I'm actually spending quite a bit of time on this. I'm just looking and copying values and seeing, this value is not as dark as that value, so I need to push it a little darker. So I'm going to push it a little darker. That's all I'm doing, okay? If you want to use the measuring techniques that we've talked about, you can do that. If you want to use the outlines, though, I would stay away from outlines. It's really not going to be helpful in the long run if you draw outlines before you shade. It's going to help you much more in the long run of learning how to draw what you see. Like here, between the shadow and the highlight, I don't want to draw a line there. I want the value to create that, and it's not even an edge there. It is, but it's a soft edge is what we call that, right? So it's like I'm shading that, and then I'm fading from darker shading to lighter shading. So I've got sort of dark shading on the dark side of that, and then I'm going to fade that into lighter shading because it's a soft edge. It's not a hard edge. A hard edge would be where you have a clear line between values. And then there's some dark patches here. Again, those are faded in. They're not a hard outline, a hard edge. They're soft edges. And so if you can start to think about your artwork in terms of forms created by hard edges and soft edges, that's going to help you tremendously as you start to create more complicated designs and more complicated artworks and more detailed and all that stuff. Anyway, I'm going to jump into time lapse and stop talking to you and just let you get to work on yours. This photograph is in the link in the description down below if you want to copy along, or you could just pile some fabric on the table in front of you and draw what you see there. okay. There you have it. This here, is this here, this here, is this here, this shadow is this shadow, this shadow is this shadow, this shadow is this shadow. I eyeballed it, I didn't do any actual measuring, but really the important thing about this picture, about this lesson today, is that I didn't draw a single line on the entire page. Not one. Not one, not even a little bit. Everything on here was made out of shading, out of different values. Everything was put together by looking to see where values create hard edges and looking to see where values create very soft edges. That's it. That's all there is. Well, that's it for today for drawing folds of fabric. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Next week, we're going to keep putting together all of our ideas about shading and texture and measuring and overlapping. We're going to put all those things together again in one last hurrah and draw a picture of this basket of fruit. I can't wait to see you then.